Hi there. Another episode of our bringing you people from the Revolutionary War period. My name is Ebenezer White. I am the apothecary for the town of Danbury, and also am a captain of the militia. Now you're probably wondering what an apothecary does. The term that's still around now and then, but not very often used, and even some of your parents might not know what it is. But an apothecary today would be called a pharmacist. And back in the Revolutionary War days, the apothecary made up and dispensed all the medications that were required by the people in the town. Now, what did he make up? Good question. Medicine back then was nothing like it is today. They had no idea at all why people got sick, how they got sick, and how they got well. Everything was done pretty much by trial and error. Now, that's not saying it's all bad. There are a handful of things that they did back in the Revolutionary War era that they still do today. But for the most part, herbs were not the panacea that they tried making it out to be. So, apothecary shop would work something like this. You're home, you wake up in the morning, you get an upset stomach and a headache, and mom comes in and says, it's time to get up, go to school, and you just kind of pull up the covers and roll over, and I don't feel good. So after she gets the rest of the kids out to school, she then says, I'm going to the apothecary. She comes down to see me, and I listen to her, what's wrong with you, and thinking which one of the herbs would work best, and come up with a plan. Mix 3 or 4 different herbs together, using a mortar and pestle. I then would grind them up. It does 2 things. First of all, it grinds it up into more of a fine powder, so it'll make good tea. And it also mixes if I've got more than one ingredient in there. Then I would pour it out into a small container, much like this, and give it to your mom. She would bring it home. She'd take half of it out in some warm water and make tea with it and bring it into you and say, here, drink this. Now, you have no idea what's in it. And your first reaction probably is going to, no, that's okay, I'll pass. Mom says, it's good for you. It'll make you feel better. Now, mom doesn't lie to you, right? So you go ahead, you take the tea, you take a sip. Well, some of the stuff was absolutely horrendous tasting, but you still drank it because the apothecary made it for mom specifically for you, and mom is telling you it's going to make you better. So what happens next is that 2 days later, you wake up, fever's gone, your stomach feels better, and you jump out of bed, get ready to go to school, and everything's just fine. We know today that most of the times you get sick, it's a cold or a virus, and it's going to go away on its own. And whatever mom might get for you, some ibuprofen or some chicken soup, is all geared towards making you feel a little better. But if the virus, it has to run its course. Back then, they thought it was the herbal supplement that worked. That was good to a point, but if you went to another town, you get something completely different, because that apothecary would mix 3 different herbs, totally different from the ones I used. And because it was a virus, a cold, you get better in 2 or 3 days, and he'd say, aha, I got it. And that's what he'd make for all the people in town for him. Now, some of the stuff that we used in the apothecary shop, just showing you the mortar and pestle. This is a really old one. This goes back to about the Civil War era. But we would gather the leaves from different plants. I'd hang them up in my shed to dry. And once they would dry, you know how leaves are in the fall, and they get dry, they're all nice and crinkly, and you can kind of crush them up in your hand. That's the way we want them, is nice and crinkly like that. And we end up with a powder much like this. If you think of it look inside of a tea bag, and it looks just like this. So the dose would be, say, a spoonful in a cup of water, and to make tea. I've got it in the Mortar and Pestle. How does Mom get it home? It's not a regular drugstore. You don't have all these nice little bottles and caps and label and everything else. We end up having to use these small containers. And more often than not, Mom has a couple of these in the kitchen, and she brings one with her. I'll take and I'll fill up to the base here with the herbal mix, hand it back to her, and she takes it home, and she usually be enough for 2, maybe 3 doses of the tea. Now, next thing you start wondering about, that's all real nice, but you know, the apothecary is doing his job, and doing his job means he's got to be earning money to take care of his family. How does Mom pay? There's a thing called barter system, and on occasion, Mom or Dad may have some coin, usually British, but it could be silver, maybe even a gold coin, that they could use to pay. But the vast majority of people in town didn't have any money. What they did is they bartered their work for something that they needed. So that myself, being the apothecary, I may provide the herbal remedies and so forth for Mom, because she thinks it works. She's going to come back and want more. She's going to want a larger container of it so that she's got it in her kitchen for whenever she needs it. Dad, on the other hand, is, let's say that he is a carpenter, much like Mr. Ryder was. And he would then do some work for me in the apothecary shop or in my home. You know, it might be putting up new doors, it might be reframing windows. Maybe, you know, a lot of these houses had dirt floors, so maybe he's going to put down a floor for me. And it just kind of balances out what the cost is, what it cost me for all the herbs and so forth, and what it cost him for all the wood. And we just do the labor part of it as an agreement. Today the tax man would be very upset if he knew that we were doing the barter system, but it still goes on. There's a lot of people that will come and do you. Good example, someone will come and shovel your sidewalk when it snows. And in turn, maybe Mom makes a batch of brownies or something else that you can kind of trade off for it. A couple other things that we have. If I made something for Mom and it worked, how do I know that I can make it again, the exact same thing? Well, one of the ways of doing it was with one of these. This is what's called a balance scale, and right now it's pretty much balanced. You notice it's pretty equal on either side. I have little pieces of tin or lead that are, I know how much they weigh, and I can put on one side, and what it'll do is it'll drop it down like that. I put the herb in the other pan until it gets enough that it back up to being even. Now I know, I don't know that it's an ounce or 2 ounces, but for quantity, I know that it's going to take the piece of tin. So it comes back again, she wants enough for 6 doses. Well, 6 times into the thing with the piece of tin, and I've got the same dose times 6. Now she's got enough to be able to give all the kids if she needs to. Among other jobs that the apothecary might have, Danbury was a relatively small town. It was becoming very active with the colonial tradesmen coming through. The hat factories were just starting to really get started. You know, they were small buildings, but they were really starting to get started. So there were other things that the town ended up needing that they didn't have. So, you know, a lot of the stuff was picked up by some of the people in town, myself being included. And one thing that the apothecary did in town at the time was to be the barber. And ordinarily the barber is not so much for cutting hair. Most men let the hair grow long down to their necks, put it in a ponytail, You go and see some of these reenactments with colonial period outfits. You'll see a lot of people with the ponytails. Nothing to do with, you know, fashion or showing off or anything. It was just being understanding that it still costs money. It still costs some work to get a haircut, and so long as you keep the hair long and you brush it out, it's fine. Now, this is one of the tools that the apothecary would have used. This is a straight edge razor, and it's used for shaving. Now, I'm sure none of you are into shaving yet. However, Dad is, and you know that he has either electric shaver, he's got a special razor that has 3, 4, 5 blades on it at a specific angle so that he can just go down the side of his face and take the whiskers off. This, on the other hand, was just single blade, kept nice and sharp, and in doing down one side of the face, you almost need to do it in front of a mirror so that you see that you're getting each and every spot. You learn fairly quick what the proper angle is. If it's not enough angle, all you're doing is just going to smear the soap or the water or whatever you have in your face. If it's too much, you're going to end up with a smile that goes back halfway to your ear. Another thing that the apothecary might do is some surgical things. Now, he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a surgeon, so he didn't get involved in the real, I guess you could call heavy duty stuff. The nearest doctor at that time was in New Haven, and if you were really sick and you needed, say, surgery on your stomach, you'd be put into a horse and buggy and taken to New Haven. If you survived the trip, then you would have the surgery done there and they would take care of you from there. But there were a lot of little things that the apothecary could do, and amongst them was a very common thing when people got injured, broke the skin, is it get infected and it turned into a boil. And boil is nothing more than a rounded hump of skin, usually very tender, and it's filled with pus. And the treatment for it now is soaks and antibiotics, so forth. Back then, the only real treatment for it was to drain it. And that's where a tool like this came in. It's kind of hard to see, but it does have on the end almost like an arrowhead and a real sharp point on it. And what it would do if you had the boil on, say, on your hand, is you stab it like that. Yes, it hurt, but the idea about just stabbing at it, you didn't have time to react. You didn't jerk your hand away. At least, you know, we broke the skin and then it's able to drain. The chests are typical of what they would have used for storage. The apothecary did not have a store, much as they do today. More often than not, he had a small shed that he built on the side of his barn that he used for the apothecary shop, and needed to have these boxes around to store some of the stuff in, because being a small shed, he couldn't spread out 50 different types of herbs and ointments and all the glassware. He needed to have a place that he could store all the stuff. The only other thing really right now to want to tell you about is what was the most valuable thing to the colonial household, and get all kinds of different answers. But what it really comes down to is water. You had to have water to survive. And one of your chores at your age may be go down to the stream and fill buckets with water. You kind of remember the pictures of the Dutch boy with the yoke on and the buckets on either side. You may have a get-up something like that. You go down, you fill the buckets, you put them on the yoke, and you come back. And by the time you get back, the buckets are probably 2/3 full because you're stumbling along as you go and it spills a little bit. But you go down, get the water, put it into a barrel, usually beside the garage, beside the barn. And you keep on doing this, back down the stream, back to the barn, until the barrel that you were filling was full. If you were lucky and you had a shallow water table, you were able to dig a well. Understand that they were all done by hand, so you couldn't get down 100, 150 feet the way they do now. Made the job a lot easier, obviously, because the bucket would just go down on the rope into the water and you reel it back up. But you still had to do it one bucket at a time to fill this barrel. And you get all the water in that barrel, and the question then comes up, what's the first thing you're going to do with it? And, oh, you know, you're going to bathe, you're going to brush your teeth. This is all stuff that was foreign to them back then. They didn't, because water was so scarce, if you think about it, having to do it by the bucketful each day, water was a scarce commodity. So they would, the first and foremost thing that you used it for was for the livestock. You had to make sure that whatever you had for livestock, pigs, sheep, goats, had enough water to survive. Much the same as you need water to survive, the animals do as well. And put out the water for them first. The second thing is for your crops. Again, because you need to eat. You'll survive without having your bath, but you can't survive without a meal. And so if you've got crops growing as well, then that's going to be the second thing that it's used for. The third thing it's going to be used for is Mom's going to use it in the kitchen. Now, it's not necessarily for making up bottles of water to drink, but rather she may be making dyes for clothing. She may be bending some straw in order to make a broom. And she also uses some for cooking. You know, you get this great big pot there of stew, starts with water from someplace. The last thing it's used for, if there's any left, is for what we now call personal hygiene. And now we get into something that's peculiar to back then and doesn't always sound proper here. If there's enough there, by the bucketful into the house, into a large tub, and time for a bath. If we use the Ryder house just as the example, you have Mom, Dad, grandmother, and 7 children. Who gets the first bath? Oh, they say, you know, the mother or the grandmother, you respect your elders, you know, you got to do the kids first. No. Back in those times, the man of the house was truly the man of the house. So Dad got the first bath. The second bath didn't go to Mom or Grandma, it went to the oldest son. And it went that way down through all the boys until the smallest boy had his bath. Now it's Mom's turn. Mom gets her bath, her mother gets the second bath, and then the daughters, the girls, all the way down from the biggest to the smallest, get their bath. Now, it sounds rather time consuming, and it was. It took a long time to go through everything. But the thing you have to remember is that tub of water never got changed. It's the same tub of water that Dad used that your little sister is now using. There's a saying about don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that's exactly where the saying came from, that the water would be just so muddy, dirty, cruddy, everything. It could be real easy to just tip it over and dump the water out, and whatever's in the tub goes with it. Hopefully that's given you some information that helps understand the apothecary and some of the things that went on in town. The museum has a lot of information on many of the jobs that were done in town and the people who did them, and a valuable resource. If you have a chance to do some study or some research, be sure and give them a call. They'd be more than happy to help you out. Have a good day.